All right, guys, we are back again today with our next lesson from our packet. Today we're going to be doing lesson 4, getting the most from what you read. So again, if you would like to do this ahead of time and then come back and watch and check your answers, you may do that. Or you can do it with me, follow along with me and fill it out as I do. Either way is perfectly fine. So let's go ahead and get started. Martha, I've read this story a dozen times or more, and I'm still not sure what's going on. I think I'll wait until someone makes it into a movie. Do you ever have trouble understanding what you read? Everybody has this problem at some time or another. Good readers know a few tips that help them get the most from what they're reading. After you finish this lesson, you'll know those tips too. Tip 1. Ask yourself, why am I reading this? Your reason for reading can affect the way you read. Before reading, ask yourself, why am I reading this? Are you doing your homework? Or are you reading TV Guide to see what comes on at 7 p.m.? Are you reading for enjoyment or just to pass the time? You need to adjust the way you look at a selection of text based on your reason for reading. If you are reading for fun, you might read more quickly. Reading for a school assignment or a test is a different matter. When you read a school assignment, you will be reading to find out information. Don't rush on your first read, but don't go too slowly either. You want to understand the overall picture, and taking too much time to read might make you more confused, as details and main ideas begin to blur together. Instead, when you are finished, skim the passage again to remind yourself of important points by looking for them specially. To skim means to run your eyes over the passage to look for important ideas. The following tips discuss other good ways to get the most out of your reading. Tip number 2, preview the passage. You can warm up for reading by previewing the passage before jumping right in. Previewing means looking over a passage before you really read it. Previewing will give you an idea of what to expect and can help you understand the passage better. You will probably remember more of it later too. Here's how to preview. Look at the title. Look at the table of contents and index in nonfiction books. Look at the headings and subheadings. Headings and subheadings are the words or phrases that tell you what parts of the passage are about. In a book, look for chapter headings that break the book into parts. You will learn more about headings and subheadings in Tip 3. Read any words in italics, bold print, capital letters, or underlined print. These special types of print tell you that the words are important. They may tell you something about the main idea. Remember, the main idea of a passage is what it is mostly about. Look at any illustrations, diagrams, photos, or tables. Also, read the words beneath or beside the illustrations. Ask yourself, why did the author include these? How do they tell me more about the topic? When previewing a passage, read the first sentence of each paragraph. The first sentence usually tells what the whole paragraph is about. You can spot paragraphs by looking for indents. An indent is a gap at the start of a sentence. It shows that a new paragraph has started. Take a few minutes to preview Tarantula on page 49 before moving on to the next tip. So let's take a look. It tells us how to preview here, and now it's asking us to preview Tarantula on page 49 before moving on to the next tip. So let's turn to page 49. And we're going to take a look at this passage. This passage starts on page 49. There's a piece of it here, some of it here. Again, we have some more here. And then we have some more on page 52. So we're going to preview the passage really fast, according to the way that it tells us that we're supposed to do that. So the first thing that we have to do is look at the title. The title is Tarantula. I can assume just by looking at the title that the passage is most likely going to be about tarantulas. Look at the table of contents and index in nonfiction books. This is a passage, not a book, so it is most likely not going to have any sort of table of contents or index. So on this, since it's not a book, we can skip over that part. Look at the headings and subheadings. Okay, now we do have these. In nonfiction passages, you'll see that there are going to be headings and subheadings that can tell us what particular parts of the passage are going to be about. So I'm looking at the headings and subheadings here. This first one says, don't judge a book by its cover. So I can assume that this part might be talking about how maybe we shouldn't judge spiders just by what they look like. Then here we have big spiders, little spiders. So I can infer that this part is probably going to be talking about the sizes of the spiders. Then here we have parts of a tarantula, and this is a diagram, which it tells us here in just a minute to be looking for. And then on the final page of the passage, we have eat or be eaten. Again, I believe this part, based on the heading, is going to be talking about whether spiders are prey to certain animals and what animals they are predators to. Eat or be eaten. So I can infer that that's what this part's going to be about. And then finally, living for 20 years or more. I can infer that this part of the passage is probably going to be about how long a spider might live. So we did that part of the preview. We looked at our headings and subheadings. Okay, then it says read any words in italics, bold print, capital letters, or underlined print. So I'm going to go back to the passage and I'm going to look. Are there any words that are bolded, italics, underlined? The first word I can see here is tarantula is a bold word. I'm going to assume that that means that word tarantula is important. And since it is the title of the passage, I believe it is going to be important to what this passage is talking about. We have some more words here. We have bird spider in italics. That's probably because it's a new term that maybe we have not heard before, or a new type of spider we've never heard of before. Okay, going on. These words here are in bold, and these are part of the diagram. So I'm assuming these are some really important parts of the spider. And then I'm looking for any more bold or italicized words, and I don't think I see any in this part. So we looked for bold and italicized words, so we know what words are going to be important. Next, look at any illustrations, diagrams, photos, or tables. We did see that there is a diagram here, and I know this is a diagram because it has a picture, a title, and it's actually labeled with arrows pointing to the different parts of the spider. That's what makes it a diagram. It has the different labels and it's showing us the different parts of the spider. Okay. Then it says, read the first sentence of each paragraph. It's usually going to tell us what the whole paragraph is about. And we know when the paragraphs start because of indents. So let's look to see if we can find any indents here. Okay, this is what they're talking about here. When you see this space in front of some words, that's an indent. So we have an indent here, here, and here. Okay, so we also have one here at the front or at the top and one here. These are all called indents, these spaces. That tells me that that's the beginning of the next paragraph. So it says, read the first sentence of each paragraph. This one says, have you ever been frightened by a spider? Now we call that a hook. Whenever we start an essay or a story with an interesting fact or a question, that's called a hook. So this author, Karen Nichols, is trying to hook us in her passage about spiders. The next first sentence says, the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, is true for spiders. So that's what this passage is going to be about. It's going to be talking about how we shouldn't just judge spiders based on what they look like. The first sentence here says, there are hundreds of different kinds of tarantulas in the world. Okay, I'm guessing this paragraph is going to be about the hundreds of different types of tarantulas. The next paragraph starts with, the tarantula's bite helps it kill insects and other small animals for food. Now I'm assuming this paragraph is going to be talking about the bite of a tarantula and how it kills other insects and small animals. The next paragraph says the trapdoor spider is found in the southwestern United States. I'm guessing this paragraph is going to be all about the trapdoor spider. This paragraph says the trapdoor spider is shy. So again, this paragraph is continuing to talk about the trapdoor spider. And the last page of the passage, tarantulas don't just eat. Okay, so this paragraph is going to be telling us about how they don't just eat. I believe this paragraph is going to be talking about how sometimes they are going to be eaten as well. This one says other tarantulas have an even stranger way to scare off animals looking for a furry meal. I believe this paragraph is going to be talking about how tarantulas scare off other animals that might be there to harm them or eat them. And finally, the last paragraph, the first sentence says, even with these great defenses, many young tarantulas are eaten by other animals. I'm assuming that this passage is going to tell us about how they, in fact, are eaten by some animals, and maybe about how long they live. Okay, so we read the first sentence of each paragraph, and we finished previewing our passage. That just goes to show you how much you can learn about a passage just by previewing the title, the table of contents, the headings, subheadings, all those important words that are in bold, the illustrations, diagrams, photos, and the first sentence of every paragraph. That can really help us understand a passage before we ever even start reading it. All right, tip number 3, use headings to find key ideas in a passage. Headings or subheadings are usually in smaller type than the passage titles. Headings help show you where different ideas are located in the passage. They can help you find certain information more quickly. Headings and subheadings are often used to mean the same thing, but headings generally let the reader know about a bigger topic. When a topic needs to be broken into smaller ideas, subheadings are used. For instance, in this lesson, the heading, Lesson 4, Getting the Most from What You Read, tells you what the main topic is. The tips or subheadings give you more information about that topic. You can use both headings and subheadings to quickly find information in a passage. For example, let's say an author wrote a passage about the life of Abraham Lincoln and used the following subheadings: School days and home life, Abe becomes head of a post office, teaching himself about laws, Lincoln becomes 16th president, the war years. Number 1 says, under which subheading could the reader learn about Lincoln working with the U.S. mail? Well, let's think about these headings here. The first one says, A, the war years. Okay, again, I'm looking for where I can learn about him working with the U.S. mail. Does it seem like a paragraph talking about the war years is going to help us figure out about Lincoln's time working with the U.S. mail? No, I don't think so. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that answer off because I know that's not the right answer. Next, school days and home life. It sounds like this part of the passage is going to be all about his time in school when he was younger and what his home life was like. Is this going to help us find information about him when he was in the U.S. mail? No. So that's not going to be it. C, Abe becomes head of a post office. Let's think about that for a second. What is a post office? A post office is where you send and receive mail. Is this going to help us figure out, learn things about Lincoln when he was working with the U.S. mail? Probably so. So let's leave that one. And D, teaching himself about laws. Laws. Those are the rules and things that government officials and people that are in charge make, like the speed limit or the fact that we're not allowed to steal. Is that going to help us figure out about Lincoln's time with the U.S. mail? No, probably not. So the best answer is C. Abe becomes head of a post office. And my clue words here were post office, because I know that has to do with mail. Okay, tip number 4, ask questions before you read. Once you have previewed the passage, think about what you might find out once you start reading. Here are a few questions to guide you. What do you think the subject of the passage will be? How is the passage organized? Does the author tell about events in the order in which they happen? Or are two things compared, showing how they are alike and different? What type of writing is it? Is it a made-up story? A story about real people, places, and ideas? A play or a poem? Why did the author write it? Does the author want to entertain you, inform, or teach you, convince you, or simply share his or her ideas and experiences? What do you expect to learn from the passage? What kinds of questions do you think it will answer? Number 2, preview the passage on pages 49 through 52. What do you predict it will be about? Well, good for us. We already previewed the passage. And so what we said earlier was, and again, I want to make sure we write in complete sentences every time we answer. I believe this passage will be about tarantulas and I'm going to look at the headings to see. Their size, their different parts, what they eat, and what their predators are, and how long they live. Now again, I have not read the passage yet, but just from the different headings and reading the first sentence of each paragraph, I was able to come up with what I believe this passage is going to be about, just based on those things. So again, it says, I believe this passage will be about tarantulas and their size, their different parts, what they eat, and what their predators are, and how long they live. Okay, this says read the first 2 paragraphs of Tarantula, then answer the question that follows. Tarantula by Karen Nichols. Have you ever been frightened by a spider? Sometimes even little spiders look a bit creepy crawling around. But what about big, hairy spiders? Now those can be really scary. Don't judge a book by its cover. The old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, is true for spiders. Even some of the most scary-looking ones aren't nearly as harmful as you might think. One really scary-looking type of spider is the tarantula. It is one of those big, hairy spiders. Number 3, now that you have read the first part of the passage, what do you think it is about? Okay, so now that we've read this first part, it's asking us, what do we think the rest of the passage is going to be about? I think, again in complete sentences, this passage will tell us, or instead of tell, I'm actually going to use the word inform, will inform us, that just means give us information, all about tarantulas. I think this passage will inform us all about tarantulas. Continue reading about tarantulas. Big spiders, little spiders. There are hundreds of different kinds of tarantulas in the world. The bird spider is a tarantula that lives in South America. This spider is very large. Its body, not counting its legs, can be as long as 3.5 inches. It is called a bird spider because it lives in trees and eats small birds. Some bird spiders in Brazil also eat small amphibians and reptiles. The tarantula's bite helps it kill insects and other small animals for food. The bite of some kinds of tarantulas can make humans very sick. Most of these dangerous spiders, like the funnel web spider of Australia, live in other parts of the world. Tarantulas that live in the United States are far less harmful to humans. To be bitten by one of these spiders wouldn't be much fun, but for the most part, it would be about as serious as being stung by a bee. That's right, although tarantulas are made to seem like very dangerous creatures in movies, people rarely die from tarantula bites. The trapdoor spider is found in the southwestern United States. It grows to be about an inch long. For its home, it digs a burrow in the ground. It covers this burrow with a hinged door made of mud and its own silk. It also lines the burrow with silk to make a comfortable nest for its young. And then again, here's the diagram. The trapdoor spider is shy. Most females hardly ever leave their nests. They don't really have to. The trapdoor spider simply waits just inside its burrow for a tasty animal to walk past. When it senses the footsteps of its victim, it throws open the door, grabs the animal, and poisons it. Then the tarantula drags its victim inside. Tip number 5. Ask questions as you read. As you read, slow down to ask yourself, do I understand what the author is saying? Does this make sense? What will the writer say next? You may also want to ask yourself other questions about the passage. What else would you like to know about the topic? Number 4. Based on what you've read so far, write one question about the passage. It could be about something you don't understand or something you would like to know more about. On this part, you can go ahead and write any question that you would like, anything that you don't understand, something that you want to learn more about. Any question will be just fine. Just make sure to write it in a complete sentence and, of course, put a question mark at the end. I'm going to ask, what kinds of insects and animals do tarantulas eat? What kinds of insects and animals do tarantulas eat? Tip number 6. Stop occasionally to retell or summarize. When you're reading, stop now and then to summarize. When you summarize, you retell the main idea and most important points in your mind. If you have difficulty summarizing, then you may not fully understand the passage. You may want to go back and reread some parts of it. Number 5. Which of the following is the best summary of the section, Big Spiders, Little Spiders? So, it's talking about this section right here called Big Spiders, Little Spiders, and it wants to know which of these choices is the best summary of this passage. A. Bird spiders are very large. They live in South America and have bodies more than 3 inches long. They sometimes eat frogs. Does it talk about bird spiders in this paragraph? In these paragraphs? Yes, it does. But is that all these paragraphs are about? No. These paragraphs are also talking about, it does talk about the bird spider, but it also talks about the funnel web spider of Australia, talks about the trapdoor spider. It talks about how some tarantula bites aren't actually that harmful, so it actually talks about quite a few more things than just the bird spider. So it's not going to be A, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that one off. B, there are 3 main kinds of tarantulas. Some tarantulas are very small and some are very large. Some are more dangerous than others. Tarantulas eat many things and are found on several continents. Could that be it? I think so. It covers the most important points in those paragraphs. There are many different kinds. Some are small, some are large, some are more dangerous. So let's hold on to that one and leave that one. C. Tarantulas that live in the United States are much less dangerous to humans than the funnel web spider that lives in Australia. Is that all these paragraphs are about, though? No, we're missing some important details to consider that as summary. So C is not going to be the answer. D. The tarantula's bite helps it kill insects and small animals for food. The bite of some kinds of tarantulas can make humans very sick. Well, this is only talking about the bite of tarantulas. So this doesn't talk about all the things that big spiders, little spiders talks about. So none of these that we crossed out really cover enough information to be a good summary. So B is going to be the best answer. Tip number 7. Use information from the text to draw inferences. As you learned in Lesson 3, an inference is a guess you make based on clues from the passage. When an author doesn't come right out and say something, you may need to guess. One thing you may need to figure out for yourself is why something happens. In Tarantula, the author says North American spider bites are not very dangerous to people. She does not explain exactly why that is true, but we can look for other details and use what we already know about bug bites to help us guess. She likens the bites to bee stings. From this, we can guess that the bites contain only a little poison. Tip number 8. Study the graphics that go with the text. Graphics are charts, graphs, drawings, photographs, and other artwork. Authors use them to explain their texts and make them clearer for the reader. Sometimes a picture can show something that is hard to say in words. Looking at graphics can help you understand a passage. Look at the diagram of the tarantula on page 50 and then answer the question. Where are the tarantula's pedipalps located? A. On its rear. B. Under its fangs. C. On its head. D. Next to the spinnerets. Well, let's take a look at our diagram. We're going to see where the pedipalps are located. Okay, this is the word I'm looking for here, pedipalps, right here. And as you can see, there are 2 arrows going down, pointing to exactly where that is. So it looks like they're kind of sticking out of its head, and we have one here, and we have one here. So let's take a look at our choices. On its rear, no. Not on its rear. Under its fangs. Well, let's look at the fangs. Okay, here's the fangs. The arrow is pointing here. Under its fangs. Maybe. Let's leave that one and see. On its head. Okay, now this looks like it makes more sense. This is its head, and the pedipalps are on its head. I couldn't really tell if it was under the fangs or not, but now that I think about it more, it looks like it's more beside the fangs. Next to the spinnerets. Spinnerets are right here on its rear. So these are not next to the spinnerets, so I know for sure that that's not it. Between B and C, I know for sure that they are on its head. Under its fangs, I'm not thinking that that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that off. And C is going to be our correct answer. On its head. Continue reading about the tarantulas. Continue to ask questions and summarize as you read. Eat or be eaten. Tarantulas don't just eat. They are in danger of being eaten too. Birds and mice try to kill them for food. Tarantulas even try to kill each other for food. But tarantulas have many ways to protect themselves. Sometimes they try to scare away their enemies. They stand up on their hind legs and rub their jaws together to make a loud hissing sound. Other tarantulas have an even stranger way to scare off animals looking for a furry meal. These tarantulas are covered with thousands of tiny hairs. The hairs fly off the tarantula's body and into the eyes, nose, and mouth of its attacker when the tarantula rubs its legs together. The hairs have tiny hooks on them, so you can imagine how pleasant this is for the tarantula's enemies. Living for 20 years or more. Even with these great defenses, many young tarantulas are eaten by other animals. But tarantulas can live very long lives, some even 20 years or longer. Okay, and that brings us to our next passage, Lance Armstrong Rides to Win by Caroline, excuse me. Okay, the beginning. Now, it says this passage is about a famous bicyclist. Read the passage, then answer numbers 1 through 8. Now, let's remember the tips that we were taught about how to preview a passage. Lance Armstrong Rides to Win is the title, so I'm going to assume that this passage is going to be about Lance Armstrong. Then I'm going to look at the headings. We have the beginning, a serious setback, the biggest race, and beyond the records. So that kind of tells me what each part of this is going to be about. And then if I look at the first sentence, now remember, these indents are these spaces. That's when a new paragraph starts. So then I can look at the first sentence of each passage and see what each part is going to be about. So if you would like to, go ahead and pause the video now, and you can read the first sentence of each paragraph so that you know what this passage is going to be about. I'm going to go ahead and read the passage. I don't see any bold words or italicized or capital letters or underlined words. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading, and then we will answer the questions that follow. Lance Armstrong Rides to Win by Caroline Bruce. The beginning. Lance Armstrong was a great athlete as a child. By the time he was 12, Armstrong was racing in triathlons against adults. In a triathlon, the racers must swim, bike, and run. Armstrong even won races against adults when he was still a kid. Soon it was clear that biking was Armstrong's best sport. He began training only for bicycle races. His dream was to ride in the Tour de France. The Tour is the world's best-known bicycle race. A serious setback. When Armstrong was 25, doctors told him he had cancer. That is a serious illness. The cancer was in many parts of Armstrong's body. The doctors said he had a 50% chance of living. He spent the next 3 years fighting the disease. Once he was healthy, doctors told Armstrong something surprising. He had actually had a 3% chance of living, not 50. They hadn't told him the truth at first because they didn't want him to lose hope. The biggest race. The Tour de France is a 3-week race that circles France. The race is made up of 22 stages. Each day is called a stage. The riders must go a certain distance in one day. This way, each day is a race that is part of the bigger race. At the end of each stage, the daily times are added up. The rider with the shortest time is called the leader. The leader wears a yellow shirt the next day. At the end of the race, the rider with the shortest time wins. Parts of the race go through the mountains of France. The mountains are hard to ride through. The race is a great test of strength and staying power. Armstrong had done well on the Tour de France before he got cancer. He had won 2 stages, one in 1993 and one in 1995. In 1999, Armstrong returned to the race, ready to win it all. He had beaten the odds against cancer. Now Armstrong beat the other riders. He won the race by more than 7 minutes. Armstrong went on to win the Tour de France 6 more times in a row. In 2005, after his 7th win, Armstrong decided to stop racing for a living, but he returned in 2009 and this time took 3rd place in the Tour de France. At 38, he was one of the oldest people ever to do so well. Before Armstrong, 4 men had won the Tour de France 5 times. One had even won the race 5 times in a row, but no one else had come close to Armstrong's record of 7 wins in a row. Beyond the records. If Lance Armstrong had never had cancer, he would still be famous. But Armstrong has used his fame to help other cancer patients. His yellow Livestrong wristbands are sold to raise money for research. He used his 2009 return to the Tour to bring attention to the disease. No one knows what struggles might lay in store for Lance Armstrong, but he will surely meet them with the strength of a champion. Between his racing and his ability to beat cancer, Armstrong has already done amazing things. This passage is a little older, so there's probably some updated information out there about Lance Armstrong, but we're going to go ahead and start answering the questions. Question number 1 says, what is this passage mostly about? A, how the Tour de France is run. B, why doctors lied to Lance Armstrong. C, how Lance Armstrong became famous. D, what Lance Armstrong did to help others. A, how the Tour de France is run. This passage does talk about the Tour de France and talks about how Lance Armstrong participated in that race, but this passage is not really mostly about that. It does mention it, but it's not what the passage is mostly about. So we're going to cross out A. B, why doctors lied to Lance Armstrong. The passage does say that the doctors lied to Lance Armstrong about his chance of survival, but is that really the main point of this passage? No. So we're going to go ahead and cross out B. C, how Lance Armstrong became famous. I think that's a good answer. This is talking about Lance Armstrong. We know that this passage is about Lance Armstrong, and it's talking about all the things that he did, the fact that he had cancer, and how he won many Tour de France races, and how he became famous. So I believe that that's a good choice, but let's go ahead and look at D to make sure. What Lance Armstrong did to help others. Did Lance Armstrong help other people? Yes, he did do that. But is that what this passage is all about? No. It talks about that a little bit at the end, but the beginning of the passage and most of the passage is talking about how he became famous. So we're going to go ahead and mark out D, and C is going to be our answer to number 1. Number 2, what information can be found in this section, the biggest race? Let's look at the biggest race here. A, Lance Armstrong's early sports success. B, Armstrong's treatment for cancer. C, how Armstrong has helped cancer patients. D, the way riders win the Tour de France. Well, let's take a look. A, Lance Armstrong's early sports success. This part of the passage doesn't necessarily talk about his early sports success. It talks about his early sports success more at the beginning, in the part that's called the beginning. So A, I don't believe that's the answer, because that's not really what this part of the passage is about. B, Armstrong's treatment for cancer. This part, again, it's not really talking about his treatment for cancer. A serious setback is more where we find out about his cancer and the problems that he had for that. So I'm going to go ahead and cross out B, because I don't believe that's the answer either. C, how Armstrong has helped cancer patients. Well, this part is called the biggest race, and it's talking about the Tour de France. I don't believe this part is about that. This part's mostly about the Tour de France. In fact, it talks about how Armstrong helped cancer patients in this part of the passage called Beyond the Records. So I don't think C is the answer either. D, the way riders win the Tour de France. I believe this is going to be our answer. First of all, this is the only answer choice that even talks about the Tour de France. So this has to be our answer, since we know that that is what that part's mostly about. Moving on. Number 3, what are the Live Strong bracelets used for? I'm going to go back to the part of the passage that talks about that, and that is here, Beyond the Records. It talks about the Live Strong bracelets. It says, his yellow Live Strong wristbands are sold to raise money for research. He used his 2009 return to the tour to bring attention to the disease. So his bracelets, it says, are sold to raise money for research. And when it says research, it's talking about cancer research to help other cancer patients. So I'm going to write in a complete sentence. The yellow Live Strong bracelets were sold to raise money for cancer research. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. The yellow Livestrong bracelets were sold to raise money for cancer research. Number 4, read these sentences from the passage. Lance Armstrong was a great athlete as a child. By the time he was 12, Armstrong was racing in triathlons against adults. What does the word athlete most likely mean? So we have to take a look in the sentence and look at the word athlete. I'm going to go ahead and circle it. When I think of this sentence, it's talking about how Lance Armstrong was already, when he was only 12 years old, he was already racing against adults in triathlons. So what does the word athlete most likely mean? I'm going to go ahead and write this in a complete sentence. Again, always writing our answers in complete sentence. In this passage, the word athlete most likely means someone who is participating in sporting events. So Lance Armstrong was participating in sporting events here. He was already a great athlete because he was competing, racing in triathlons against other adults when he was only 12 years old. So I'm going to repeat this answer. In this passage, the word athlete most likely means someone who is participating in sporting events. Number 5, why did doctors tell Armstrong he had a 50% chance of living through cancer? If you'll remember, the doctors lied to Lance Armstrong. He only had a 3% chance, but they told him he had a 50% chance. Now, I could just remember this from my head and go ahead and answer the question, but a better thing for me to do is to go back and look just to make sure that I choose the right answer. So, I'm going to go back and look, find that sentence in the passage, and it says, he actually had a 3% chance of living, not 50. They hadn't told him the truth at first because they didn't want him to lose hope. They didn't want him to lose hope. So let's go look at our choices. A, they didn't want him to lose hope. Looky there. B, their medical test did not work properly. No. C, they didn't know they were wrong. No. D, doctors are usually poor at math. No. So we know, according to the passage, they didn't want him to lose hope. A. Number 6, the passage says the Tour de France is a great test of strength and staying power. What are 2 ways in which the race tests these things? So we need to go back and look at our passage, the part about the Tour de France, and see what it's talking about when it says it's a great test of strength and staying power. What are 2 ways in which the race tests these things? Okay, here it says, parts of the race go through the mountains of France. The mountains are hard to ride through. The race is a great test of strength and staying power. I think that part tells us one thing, that the mountains are hard to ride through. So I'm going to use that as one of my examples of how it takes great strength and staying power. Again, I'm going to write in complete sentences. The Tour de France is a great test of strength and staying power because the riders have to race through the mountains of France. The Tour de France is a great test of strength and staying power because the riders have to race through the mountains of France. And I need one more example. The Tour de France is a three-week race that circles France. The race is made up of 22 stages. Each day is called a stage. I think the fact that this race is 3 weeks long, that shows that it is a test of strength and staying power as well. So I'm going to say, and because the race is 3 weeks long, with an exclamation point, because that's a long time. So here's my answer. The Tour de France is a great test of strength and staying power because the riders have to race through the mountains of France and because the race is 3 weeks long. Number 7. Which word from the passage means about the same as disease? We're looking at the word disease here. A, cancer. Is cancer a disease? Yes. But is cancer a word that you can use in place of disease? No, because not everyone that has a disease has cancer. So the answer cannot be A. Next, illness. B. Could illness and disease mean the same thing? Possibly. A disease is a sickness. An illness is a sickness. Let's hold on to that one. C. Distance. Distance and disease don't really mean the same thing. They kind of look the same. They have some of the same letters, but they don't mean the same thing. A disease is a sickness, while a distance is how far something is. So it can't be C. And D, patience. If you think about the word patience, it's talking about like patients in a hospital. If someone is a patient in the hospital, they're in the hospital getting treatment. Is that the same as a disease? No. So the answer for this one has to be B. Illness and disease are synonyms because they mean about the same thing. And number 8, the author says Lance Armstrong would be famous even if he had never had cancer. Why would Armstrong still be famous? Let's go back and look. If Lance Armstrong had never had cancer, he would still be famous. But Armstrong has used his fame to help other cancer patients. Okay, it goes on to tell about how he uses his fame to help cancer patients, but this doesn't really tell me why he would still be famous. I want to go back up here where it says, no one else has come close to Armstrong's record of 7 wins in a row. So I'm going to say Lance Armstrong would still be famous for his record of winning the Tour de France 7 times in a row. Lance Armstrong would still be famous for his record of winning the Tour de France 7 times in a row. And that's the end of that lesson. So thank you for following along, and let us know in the comments if you have any questions or need any help. Thank you. Bye.